there was I saw something like yesterday. Actually, I was reading about the Westall case again, and it said that there was a student who saw this craft land in the field.
Yeah.
Her friend or his friend, I don't know exactly, runs up to the UFO.
Yeah. And she can't be found.
Can't be found.
Now,
Yeah.
Ross looks into that a bit. I tried to look in it way back in the 90s, but we just didn't have enough information to do it then. But he was able to dig a bit further, and she's been found.
Oh.
And she wasn't rushed off to some asylum or anything like that. Her parents or the family were changing address and moving to another location.
Well,
and they just didn't tell the school.
So in what I was reading, it said that her friends pulled up at her house after the event, knocked on the door. Someone
that's an odd part of the story, but
claimed no one's lived there.
There's no evidence that it's part of a grand conspiracy that she disappeared. She disappeared, to her friends. In a prosaic way, just that the real reason for her disappearance, moving house and location at short notice, was not conveyed to everybody at the school or the kids or her friends.
Why wouldn't she tell everyone that she's moving, especially after that happens?
I'm not an authority on that, and it's purely for private. I'm sure it's got nothing to do with UFOs. Yeah, it was entirely prosaic reasons.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's not part of the story of some sort of dark intrigue going on there. I think it's a bit of there's no point trying to flog that particular story. It's been explained relatively well.
Out of all there's some big UFO cases, abduction stories.
Yep.
Which do you think it holds the most weight? You've got the likes of Travis Walton. You got the likes of the Betty and Barney Hill story. Which of these do you think, holds its weight the most? Because there's a lot of bullshit out there, and there's a lot of people that claim they saw / got abducted, but they're just making shit up.
It's very difficult to tell. Every high-profile story gets its supporters, but also gets its critics, big time.
Mm-hmm.
And that goes with Betty and Barney Hill, Travis Walton. One of the cases that's getting a lot of coverage at the moment, and it certainly caused a lot of attention for me at the time, was in 1973 in October, massive UFO wave across America. And one of the events that caught worldwide public attention, this was a truly worldwide story, was the abduction of Charlie Hickson and Calvin Parker down in Mississippi at Pascagoula.
Yeah, right. I haven't heard of this.
Yeah, well, there's a 4-part documentary series put together on that case, well worth looking at.
Yeah.
Based on research from Philip Mantle, English researcher. He's started looking into it. The more he looked at it, the more he realised there was so much there that hadn't been properly documented. And the story was that nobody witnessed their abduction. Well, it turned out there were other people that had been allegedly abducted as well, and other people that saw stuff happening at that wharf area where they claimed to have been abducted. But the beings involved were very unusual. They were not your grey types or Nordics. They were kind of very wrinkled skin with what appeared to be like horns or cones coming out where the ears were and the nose, no apparent eyes, all just wrinkled skin. And the reports were like, and they had hands like crabs. That was really, really bizarre report. But check it out. It's really an interesting. I've been fascinated by the case. So when I went to the one and only MUFON conference where I was invited to give a presentation in Washington, D.C. on the Australian UFO military experience in 1987.
Calvin, bring a microphone close.
Yeah, Calvin Hickson was there. So I got to meet him briefly.
Mm.
He passed away several years later, but Calvin Parker, who was much younger than him, he seemed to be like a footnote in the main story at the time, and it was like the word was that he had had a breakdown, and dropped out. Just didn't want that kind of attention. You could see what was happening to Charlie Hickson, the older guy, getting a lot of flack and, a lot of support. When you put your head up, you're going to get coverage. These days, it's I generally recommend to people, unless you really got lots of gumption and resilience, don't put your head up on a UFO story unless you truly want to promote the cause of it and all that kind of stuff. But because there are so many, you look at any story, say for example on YouTube or X or whatever, you've got your the claim, the story, positive feedback, but a whole stack of endless kind of people that most of the time they don't seem to have in-depth knowledge of the case. They're just arguing from a belief system. Can't be real, therefore it's bullshit. That kind of thing.
Yeah.
That's no way to look at a subject. If you don't have any knowledge on a subject, don't trumpet your lack of knowledge because it's pretty blatant that you don't bugger all about the case, that kind of thing. It's best to argue from the point of view of having a lot of knowledge. What I referred to previously as the deep dive. Check out your facts. Dig into it. And the opportunity for the Pascagoula case, Philip Mantle and others have done the hard yards and spent years getting all the original material. And I think he's done a pretty good job of putting together, and there's been a number of books. And they finally, Calvin Parker, who, as I said, had apparently had a breakdown, couldn't handle what happened. He was like a deer caught in the spotlight, just didn't want to know about it. He wanted out of there. Didn't want to be the center of attention. Eventually, it really preyed on him a lot. Eventually, he reckons it affected him badly.
Wasn't that the case with Betty Hill as well?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
But, that became a very famous case. But with Calvin Parker, he went on to write his own book. And there's been Philip Mantle and company, they've written a number of books about the Pascagoula case. So if you want a detailed look at an abduction case, take a look at the Pascagoula case. Definitely worth your time. And the easy initial entry, and I say this is initial entry stuff, you need to really do the deep dive on this case, is the 4-part documentary series, which I think was on the main, what's the main downloading site? Not YouTube, whatever it is anyway. Just put it into Google, it'll find it for you.
Yeah.
It's a 4-part thing on UFO abduction at Pascagoula.
Yeah, well, check it out.
Definitely worth looking at.
Check it out. What do you think about Bob Lazar? We haven't really dove deep into Bob Lazar, and that's someone who I've been following for years.
Yeah, Bob Lazar's an interesting character.
Do you think he's telling the truth?
I don't have any direct proof myself other than what people tell me.
Because I also saw when I was looking into yourself, I noticed you've linked up with George Knapp before.
Yeah, George came to Australia to give a presentation on Skinwalker Ranch in particular.
Yeah.
He talked about Bob Lazar and, he wanted to get out of the conference area and said, you want to come go for a drive along the beaches, northern suburbs, and we'll try and have a drink at every beach or whatever. Yeah. And so we went off and did that journey across the northern beaches and onto the southern beaches. And eventually, later on, they're wondering where we were. So we ended up at the Koala Bear Park just near Pennant Hills.
Yeah.
So we got to see wildlife there, Australian wildlife up close. And, a really nice guy, George, and I've been on his show a few times and that kind of stuff. And I remember once he said, just in the interest of transparency, Bill and I go back a long way. He's got some incriminating photographs of me. And I'm thinking, what the hell is he talking about? it turned out to be the photographs I took of him in the koala bear park, doing things with indigenous wildlife. So he's a nice guy, very nice guy, a good solid researcher, and he's getting a lot of kudos at the moment for a lot of the hard research that he's done over decades. And one of those stories, is the Bob Lazar story, and we were talking about that as we wound our way down the north side beaches, etc. And he seems to feel that it's fairly legit. There are parts of the story he's not so sure about.
Yeah.
No, the fact that he was able to track down.
So George Knapp doesn't like fully believe every single thing that Bob Lazar says. There's some
That's
things.
right. Yeah.
Well, if there's things that you think are a bit sus, can that not kind of affect the legitimacy of the whole story?
Well, one aspect that I've always thought might be applicable here with Bob Lazar is there's some stuff in there, like he got caught up in some sort of crime thing that he was charged with aiding and abetting the establishment of a brothel or something locally, and all he was doing was just setting up the electronics and security. So not a big deal, I guess. But there was evidence that we couldn't find any evidence for him being there. But since then, there have been people come forward to say, yes, he was there. Now, we've only got his evidence to support what he actually claims to have seen through a window and all that kind of stuff, and seeing the craft and all that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So, and the nighttime sort of launch of something. So it's all become apocryphal stuff. But it's an interesting story. I just don't know. It's one of those things that I'm like George, it looks like there's something there to it. And
his story has stayed pretty consistent since the 80s or whatever. When he first came out, it was George Knapp that leaked his story, right? Or leaked, like he gave the spotlight.
Yeah.
He put the spotlight on Bob Lazar.
Yeah.
And since then, Bob Lazar's story has stayed pretty consistent.
Yeah, well, I was on a computer network system before the World Wide Web became a big thing, and it was Paranet. And Paranet was kind of this computer setup that was being used by a lot of computer nerds to link with people of like minds around the world, kind of stuff. And so that applied also to UFOs. There was this network worldwide before the World Wide Web of researchers exchanging thousands of pieces of data with everybody around the world. It was a great way to do research. You put a message on there. Anybody out there got something on such and such and such and such? And then a day later, comes into your little inbox. This is all before email.
Yeah,
It was a great way to get data, and then that just got strengthened big time through the advent of the internet. But now it's kind of like overload problems now. Like there's just too much there, and there's a lot of people out there that set themselves up as instant experts that I've got to be honest, they know bugger all. And it becomes patently obvious, like if you do your homework. But if you're only looking at it in a superficial way, everybody's an expert, So it's there's only a handful of good, solid sort of outlets of information, and the rest is a bit of a circus, part of what I call the UFO theatre. Like lots of carry-ons and debates and controversies and you learn to just ignore most of that most of the time because it's not a ready pathway to knowing more about the phenomenon itself. Better do the field work, do the investigations, and that leads you into knowing a lot more about the subject.
Yeah.
You don't get total answers, but you certainly get an understanding of what's real and what's not just through sheer experience, I think.
So one of the things that Bob Lazar has stayed consistent with was a fingerprint reading technology. It was like it read the bone structure in your hand or something like that.
Right.
And you could use that to get into S4. Like you'd have to put your hand on this reader and it would read your bones or whatever.
Right.
And that stayed he stayed true with that. He stayed consistent. Sorry, with that story over the years.
Well, here's a story for you, and this comes out of the deep dive.
Mm.
During 1967, there was an amazing UFO encounter that occurred at a remote place in Western Australia, and it was, I think, a shearing contractor, Sprago, I think was his last name, well respected in the area, and he's driving along a country road. Object appears, and it seems to project a slow progression, solid beam. Something I'm interested in personally, of what has become known as solid light cases. This is a classic example of it, where this what appeared to be like a solid light tube is projected from the object down into the car. His car seems to be virtually taken over, and he's got about 5 minutes or more of missing time, and the clock, his watch is affected, and then it's as if suddenly it's switched off. Object leaves, and the car's still moving at high speed, and he reports it to the locals and goes to the police. And this is where a lot of the information comes from, was from an official police report, and it's clear that they regarded him well as it. But what's not known is that it took decades later, but that same location 10 years earlier was the scene of what is referred to as a major poltergeist outbreak of falling stones and stone projectiles, really weird apparitional kind of stuff going on, and min light type phenomena going on at that time 10 years earlier.
Yeah.
But a woman who was married into the family of the main people or some of the main people in that location, she wrote a book about the poltergeist outbreak from the late 50s. And in there's an anecdote, a story that she describes from a local farmer that took place a decade later on the same night, literally at the same time as Sprago, the sheep contractor, is having his solid light experience only a few kilometres away. The farmer is woken up and his dogs are really violently barking at something, and he's got these mammoth-looking dogs, you wouldn't want to argue with them. But he goes out on the veranda and suddenly he's overwhelmed with this massive light beam coming straight down onto him, and he's immediately so bright that he puts his hands up and he can see through his hands. He can see the veins of his hands, and he's up there and he's kind of paralysed. He can't move. And then it switches off, and the noise and everything, and the dogs all calm down straight after that. That story stayed hidden for decades. It was only known amongst family people until this woman wrote the book about the falling stone poltergeist outbreak 10 years earlier. So here we have confirmation of that was never found until decades later of Sprago's account that was investigated by the local police, and the report ended up in the RWF archives. I think the explanation, though, kind of went with psychological.
Psychological.
Yeah.
He was tripping.
No, not tripping, but something happened, but well,
How have they explained that entire case as just psychological?
we don't look into it too deeply. That's the way to explain it.
Mm.
Yeah.